Well, if you want to know what peace and freedom truly is about, it's when you can read something that opposes how you believe something and consider it. Why do they think that? Do I need to think that? Does that align with anything I think? No? Okay, I'm done. That's freedom. Total discontention and chaos is the person that reads something against what they believe. It's so hot and boiling, they have to spew it. You're messed up. You're a bigot. You're a misogynist. He's a con artist. How could you be involved in this? And you would vote for that guy? Well, that means X, Y, and Z now. They don't even know you.
Welcome to the Hell Has an Exit podcast with host Teddy Tarantino. New episodes every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't forget to subscribe.
Okay, guys. Hey, welcome to Hell Has an Exit. I'm your host, Bryan, aka Teddy Tarantino. If you guys like the podcast, if you want to support the show, please like and subscribe. Send to a friend who's struggling. You just never know how someone's story could affect someone that's in active addiction. And today we have Tony Hoffman.
Thank you for bringing me on here.
Appreciate
I always love an opportunity to share my story and insights. So I can't say thank you enough. And thank you to everybody that took the time to listen to this episode.
So I was saying earlier, like when people ask me to be on the show, I'm always like, dude, how do you know, people ask me like, hey, I want to be on the show. I want to tell my story, all these things. And I just don't know how legit people are, or if they're even sober or clean, or what their motives are. And when I was scrolling on your Instagram, I was like scrolling. I was like, dude, this dude's been speaking for a long time. And it's like, I've seen you making your bed for years and years and years. So like there was a lot of consistency on your Instagram and social media profile that immediately was like, damn, this dude's been doing this forever.
Yeah. And parts of my story started to blow up around the TED Talk in 2018. I gave a TED Talk speech. And I actually was invited to do one in like 2016 in New York. And it was at like a really, really prestigious prep school. And I think they were taking a risk on, at that time, like this dude was in prison. He was homeless, shaved head, tattoos. There was a lot, I think, risk involved in like, can this guy produce a high quality TED Talk for this prestigious preparatory school that we want him to come to? And we had a phone call and they're like, yeah, we want you to come. And I told them what I was thinking about doing. And then like a week later, they're like, hey, we got to cancel. And I was like, what? And they're like, well, yeah, we got to pay for these other speakers' flights. And I was like, well, I'll pay for my own. Like, this is an opportunity for me to get on the stage that in the speaking world is considered one of the most prestigious, that puts you in that really professional category of thinkers. And they canceled on me. I knew what it was. They weren't sure if I was going to be able to come on stage and deliver a professional speech. And then 2 years later, I was invited to the TEDx speech in Fresno. And
have you been speaking before that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I started in 2010. Like I'm a veteran in this, bro. It's wild because I still feel young, and I'm in a place now where people who see me or are interested or want to be a speaker, like they see me as like one of the gold standards in the mental health and addiction space. And they tell me like, bro, you're such an inspiration. I want to be able to do what you do someday. Like I saw your TED Talk when I was in treatment. Whereas Chris Herron was that for me, right? Chris Herron had the ESPN 30 for 30.
Dude, I have to watch. I've never seen it.
It's good.
Everybody and their mom that has ever been to treatment has seen it.
Yeah.
It's like the one thing.
He's got a powerful story. And, you know, the Boston accent makes him sound like a mob boss, which makes it even better. And so when I did the TED Talk, it really catapulted my speaking career in terms of not just being somebody that could come in and lock down 2,000, 3,000 youth at one time, if that's what you wanted me to do. I could also speak professionally to healthcare organizations and articulate kind of mental health and addiction in a way that's not doctory, you know, because you get a doctor and they're going to come up with all of this jargon and you kind of get lost in that sauce. Whereas a lot of lived experience can't go that direction either, right? Like you get like overly 12-step lingo or you get the stories and it's like, whoa, like we're let's not go there. Like, we want to be somewhat educated. And so, yeah, I've been doing it 15 years, 250 days a year. And it's been
250 days a year.
Yeah.
You're speaking.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Bro,
insane.
my status on...
How would you even get that many bookings?
And this is what we talked earlier.
Do you have like an assistant who?
No, I do it all myself.
Wow, that's crazy.
I had agents in the beginning. So I started in 2010. I talked to Chris in 2011. He went to Fresno State and played college ball there. I'm from Clovis, Fresno County. And somebody I went to school with, sister, went to college with him, connected me with him. And he kind of gave me the initial inspiration of, I need to figure out how to get on the national speaking stage. It's very difficult. You and I... It's very difficult. Somebody that's been in the NBA, somebody that was a Hollywood actor that kind of already has the status or the stage, they can transition, and that transition's a little bit easier. I had to figure out how to promote myself and use the internet, which I was already pretty savvy with because of my computer skills growing up. And my thing was, I knew I had a unique story. I knew there weren't people coming out of prison and becoming professional athletes that started nonprofit organizations. Like, I had the foundations of what I felt was a very inspirational and unique story. I just need people to know that it's there, because I felt like not everybody can afford Chris and the fees that he was charging and that he commanded and deserved.
Yeah.
I was at a much different rate. I just need people to find me. And so I really started investing in myself, which in my experience for people that want to get into speaking is the hardest step to take, right? Is how do I spend $5,000 on myself and not get a return for 6 months on it? Because if you're at the beginning, like, that $5,000 is a lot of money.
It could be your life savings.
It could be a life savings, right? Or it could be the engagement ring or part of the down payment for a house. Whereas I looked at it as, okay, I need to make this investment. Eventually it's going to pay off. I created a presence online that organically, when people were searching for mental health and substance use speakers, my story popped up. And once they saw my story, I started getting bookings. And then it's crazy because the guy that helped me do this in the beginning, we had like reconvened around 2020, and to see the change of where the traffic was coming from to my website, it literally went from people using kind of organic search terms, me popping up in front of them, to Tony Hoffman, Tony Hoffman, TED Talk speaker, Tony Hoffman, BMX speaker. Like, they were
specifically
looking for me. They'd heard of me. Somebody heard me. And then now it's word of mouth, right? Like, somebody said to book you. And those are the best because they call me with the approval of somebody else that's heard me, and they don't want to talk. Send us the contract. We have this many speeches. How much does that cost? Send us the contract, and I'm on the road. And I just don't like dealing with agents because I want to talk to these people myself. I want them to know who I am and what I'm about, and that it's not just a huge money grab, and agents are going to gouge them for 30% of my fees. So they're going to raise my fees even more. So yeah, it's been crazy to think that, you know, I started literally just doing local to being able to have a national brand that's people have a respect for.
Yeah. When I was scrolling, I was like, because there's so many times where people will hit me up and maybe they don't display it on social media, but it's really hard for me to commit to getting them on the show, because to me, it's like every guest on the show are people that I am like vouching for in a way. And I've had people on the show that might not be the best speaker or might not be that great at, most of the people I have on the show don't even like talking in front of crowds, let alone on a podcast. And like, sometimes they might not be the best guest, but I know them and I can vouch that I see them all the time. They're a good person. They have a great reputation. They really are clean and in recovery. They do service. They're genuine. You know, I can vouch for those things. And to me, that's so important. But I'm like running out of people to do that. I don't personally know that many people anymore that haven't been on the show. So now I'm trying to branch out and get other people that I don't know personally.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, when I went on your Instagram, I scrolled so far down, I was like, wow, this dude has been committed to speaking, sharing his story. long before you can tell like you were making any money off it. So I was like, oh, this dude's like the real deal. And then like obviously see you like make your bed every single day.
Yeah, that's it. And we'll talk about like how prison was kind of the
Mhm.
beginning of me to take control of my life through small steps. But
Mhm.
you know, in our industry, mental health, recovery, addiction, it's something so unique compared to everything else,
Mhm.
right? Like business speakers, you could have a really clouded industry and oh, I just didn't know.
Mhm.
You bring somebody in here that's not sober,
Mhm.
who's telling you they're sober,
Mhm.
that the damage that can do,
It's a different type of fraud.
it's a different type
Yeah.
of fraud, you know?
Mhm.
And this is also the work in the line of work that we do. It's very common for people to be less than forthcoming about their stuff. You know, I know guys
course,
that own
yeah.
treatment centers that claim that they're sober, but they're snorting Adderall all day long and think that because it's a prescription drug that they have ADD for, that they're sober. And it's like, nah, you're not sober and you're not a good example of sobriety, in my opinion. And eventually, you know, those cards all fall apart. And
I know people who are like public recovery advocates who have relapsed multiple times through their career, but they can't come out and say that they've relapsed because they have this reputation. And that's like, that's crazy. You know?
I see it a lot with the
Mhm.
speakers too. And it's disheartening because it's like, yo,
And I know they're good people and they slipped up, but like, man, I have a friend, one of my close friends, he got clean and he immediately started jumping into social media and talking about recovery and being like this guy. And he got super popular and he had like 60 days clean and he was so motivational, whatever. And he did it for years. And I didn't doubt that he wanted to be clean. I didn't doubt that he enjoyed being in recovery, but there was something about someone who was so fresh and new that was trying to do that. And he said one day he was trying to make a post like that's going to go the next thing to go viral. And he was like, I reposted this thing and I didn't even read it or watch it. I just saw that it got a lot of views and I just reposted it. He's like, that's when I started to feel like, what am I doing?
yeah.
And he eventually went out to like use and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's hard.
And I explain this to anybody that comes to my treatment center because I run groups, like you were saying that you did in the very beginning of your stages of treatment. And it's a process. And the more efficient you are at laying the foundation of what that process looks like, in my opinion, that's going to determine how long you can take and sustain true recovery. And that's continually working a program, whether it's through 12 steps, whether it's through some type of spiritual organization, or, you know, what they would consider evidence-based, which is, you know, clinical therapy and stuff. You have to work the program on top of some type of foundation. And it's always scary to me when somebody wants to rush in the first 30 to 60 days of their recovery, because what can happen, in my opinion, is the war stories are very attractive to people that aren't like you and I, right? They want to hear about prison. They want to hear about shootings, and they want to hear about these wild stories of like the lady that you had on this podcast. I mean, her story is fucking nuts,
crazy,
bro.
yeah.
Like most people don't know that stuff happens.
I know. In
And-
today's day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they want to hear that, right? So you get somebody who's got that kind of stuff, and then they want to jump on social media and tell you about it. Well, you're going to garner a lot of attention, but are you ready for that attention? What's your motive for that attention? And what are you trying to accomplish with that attention? Because if it's not true and sound, eventually the foundation's going to crack and it's going to start to fall apart. And then the next thing you know, you may be dealing with more than what you actually signed up for, because when the foundation cracks and falls apart, when it's built on something that's not true, you're dealing with the beginning problem still, and then you're dealing with all the repercussions emotionally that come with you building something on sand or fakeness, or, you know, just trying to be validated by attention. And there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt, and then you've got this whole mechanism of losing everything you gained, and you're in a worse position, you know?
Do you listen to a lot of motivational speakers?
No. Some, but not a lot.
What about when you first started?
No.
No.
I've been
Wow.
very against it. I've never seen Chris Herron's second documentary,
Wow.
The First Day, because I don't want to, and I don't read a lot either. I've read a handful of books. Everything that I've learned is through therapy, meditation, and studying the Bible. taking the word that's presented in the New Testament and putting a mirror up and using it to reflect against myself to just kind of find my true north. I don't want to take other people's work, repackage it, and make it mine.
Yeah, it's hard. And you do it subconsciously without even trying. It just becomes part of your stuff.
Sure. Which is why I have struggled with creating a presence for myself, so to speak, in the way of a brand online, because I don't like how fake a lot of it comes across.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, how do I create a brand in which it is what I do on a daily basis? Well, the problem with that is I'm very introverted. Like, if you get around me, unless you get really close, I'm very quiet and reserved, and I'm paying attention more than I am looking for an opportunity to speak outside of when I'm asked, come and speak, right? And so one of the things that I started doing in the last year was the daily devotional of me making my bed, because I felt like this is what I do every day. Why can't I use this to show people routine, consistency, and then...
How did that start?
In prison. You want to go there?
Yeah.
When I got to prison, I was homeless before for 6 months. My life was an absolute mess. I had become addicted to heroin, methamphetamine, crack cocaine, started with prescription pain pills like a lot of people that are in their 30s and 40s. And nothing in my life was in order. I go to prison and, I try to tell people, I don't care who you are, you're scared the first time you go to prison. You don't know what to expect. I was shackled up next to this guy that was an NLR, which is a Nazi lowrider, a very prominent skinhead gang in California. And we get there, and when we got there, right when we got off the bus, they said that the Bulldogs and the Whites were at war. And Bulldogs is a notorious gang in Fresno County. They have their own episode on Gangland that you can watch on A&E, I think, if you're interested in knowing about them. But they were previously a Northern Hispanic gang that branched off and stopped considering themselves Northerners and validated themselves as their own outfit called the Bulldogs. And they use the Fresno State Bulldog logo as who they are, but they're a Hispanic gang. And I've never been to prison, so I don't know what the fuck that means. So what I find,
like the Bulldogs are at war.
What does that mean? Like, how does that war start? Like, when or where are we going now? But it just makes you nervous, and you get back to after you go through R&R, which is the receiving unit, and, you spend a portion of that naked waiting for your clothes. It's pretty humiliating. By the time I got to the cell block, it was around 10:30. And when we went into the cell block, the Bulldogs, their call is a bark. And if you ever get around like a real bulldog, a lot of them can make barking noises that sound just like a dog.
Wow.
So you walk into this cell block. I was in cell living. It was a maximum security spot where I went. I was on D Yard in Wasco for 90 days. And everybody in there was going to serve more than 10 years time. So at the time when I went to California prisons, you went to a yard based on how much time you were going to do. But when you went to reception, they housed you based on your crime. So anybody that had a violent crime, I was there for armed robbery. Anybody that had a violent crime went to cell living because they didn't want to put you in a dorm setting where you could be a person who was going to be a harm to other inmates. So where I went, most inmates were in there for shootings, stabbings, murder, mayhem, assault with deadly weapons. Like, they were going off and they were going to go do 10 years or more. Basically, we were on lockdown for 23 and a half hours a day. I walk in, the Bulldogs are barking. You've got the Bloods doing their swoop call. Crips were doing their thing. And then on the top tier, you had the Whites and the Southern Hispanics. They operated on a much more militant way of doing things. So your cellmate, if you were going to get a cellmate, those Whites and Southern Hispanics stood outside the cell, kind of like in an army stance, so to speak. Like, they're standing very tall, and my cell had cracked, and I went up the metal staircase, and I get to my cell, and my cellmate is a skinhead. And I've never been around skinheads, right? I've been around a diverse group of people. I love everybody, but I've never been around somebody that had a really boxed in belief system about them and other people. He had a big white power on his stomach, a swastika on the back of his head, just like out of a movie, bro.
Just like American History X.
Yes, just like American History X. Big, stocky white guy.
Now, are you tatted up at all at this point?
At this time, I've got this color half sleeve.
Okay.
That's it, bro. I got all my work in prison. So we go in and he shuts the door behind me and he pulls out this like blade.
Mm-hmm.
And he says there's a no hands policy on this yard, youngster. And I'm like, what the fuck is a no hands policy? He says, if you have a problem with me, you got to stick me with this piece. If I got a problem with you, I'm going to stick you with this piece. You can't use your hands. That's what the no hands means. If you've got a problem, the problem needs to be big enough that you're willing to stab somebody over it. And immediately I'm thinking,
so there's no fighting.
Not unless you're ready to stab somebody. So this is where and I know the difference between maximum security and low security because I did most of my time on low security, but I'm grateful that where I went to start was where I went because the order and the way they operated was much more militant, which I appreciated because it was a very, very respectful place. But at the same time, everybody walked on ice because you never knew when it was time. And when it was time, it's going to be stabbings. It's going to be something I'll tell you happened when I got there. Well, we shut the door. He says there's a no hands policy. And then he gives me this piece of paper and he says, show me your paperwork. And I'm like, okay, I got to give him this paperwork. And it shows you on this piece of paper, everything you've been arrested for. And I hadn't been arrested for much. So then on this piece of paper he hands me there's a lot of names and shit on it. And I've got to put my name, my CDC number, which is my California Department of Corrections.
You got to register?
Yes. So this is
crazy. I've never heard this before.
This is crazy, right? So, and I'm like, okay, so what does this do? And he's like, it's going to go to the back. And I'm like, what's the back? And he goes, it's going to go to the hole. And then the guys that are in the hole currently at Wasco State Prison, they're the ones who are going to verify that the names on this roll call are good and that you don't owe any money on the streets. You don't owe any money or work in prison. So let's say you went to another prison yard.
No way. They do an audit of
yes,
who you are in the streets.
Yes.
If you snitched, if you owe people money.
Oh,
what?
Yes. Now watch this. And this is anybody that's done time.
I've never heard this.
No, anybody that's done time, like real time, knows that I'm not full of shit right now. This is exactly how it fucking happens. They goes to the back. They verify whether or not you need to do work or work needs to be done to you. So I'm cool because I've never been to prison. And basically what they say is they want to know if your name's in the hat. And I'm like, what the fuck's the hat? Well, turn your hat over. And it's like a fucking lottery. You know, when you do a raffle and they put all the names in the hat. Well, they basically, if your name's in the hat, they draw it out. And that means you win. You're going to get some type of work. Either you go do or it's going to come against you depending on what your name's in the hat for. Then I'm like, what does it mean that we're at war with the Bulldogs? And he goes, we're on site, bro. He goes, if you walk by a Bulldog or have an opportunity to get a Bulldog, you have to try and kill him. And I'm like, what? And he goes, if somebody sees you have an opportunity to get a Bulldog and you don't, your name's going in the hat, bro. So if you see one, make sure that instantly you take flight on him. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? He goes, you can roll it up right now. He's like, you PC up right now. Go knock on the door and tell the fucking cop you want to PC up. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to do that. I need to stay here, right? And I'm glad I did, because that night is the night that I laid down on my bunk and I tell the story of the quote that I found on the ceiling that said, be careful what you think because your thoughts become your words. Be careful what you say because your words become your actions. Be careful what you do because your actions become your habits. Be careful what you make a habit because your habits become your character, and your character becomes your destiny. When I read that quote, it was the first time in my life I was reading it as a student in life. I always thought I was invincible and knew everything, so I just moved through life without actually considering anything. But I had been beaten to pulp, hated myself, drugs about killed me, and I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ on January 21st, 2007, about 30-some days before this. And so when I read this quote, I was in a position where I wanted to be a student of life. So when I read that quote, it started to give me the blueprint of how I was going to transform who I was into who's sitting in this chair talking to you right now. Well, not only do I got to put my name on this list, there's a whole bunch of fucking rules. You got to be up at 6 o'clock. You can't take a nap. You have to make your bed every single day. You have to work out with your cellmate and all the other whites at the same time in the morning. And so you're sounding off. When you work out, you're sounding off out the cell door.
So they know where you are.
So they know where you are, and they're working. Everybody's working out. And if you didn't do these things, there was disciplinary actions. They would come after you. And something like that would be just, you having to put up your hands and fight.
Wait, these are inmate prison rules. These aren't prison rules?
No, these are inmate prison rules.
So the guards aren't making you make your bed?
No.
The inmates make each other make each other make their beds?
Yes. Now,
so there's no consequence for not making your bed that the prison will give you.
Right.
What?
Yes. And this is specific to Southern Hispanics and whites.
The
Blacks,
way that they organize.
Bulldogs, Mexicans, South Americans, the way they don't do that.
They had their other stuff.
They had their other stuff.
Their other codes. And
yeah. So this is a Southern Hispanic gang member thing and a white thing. And the other races laugh.
They used to think that you were clowns for making your bed or something.
Well, no, the disciplinary stuff that we would do to our own people, the blacks would be like, yo, we want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all are in here doing this bullshit, beating each other up over stuff. It's kind of foolish when you think about it. But the rules on a maximum security yard and the politics that you play are scary. Because when my skinhead cellmate left after 30 days.
Were you automatically like, hey, if you stay, you're joining this gang? Or was it like.
No.
Okay. It was just. So you could play by our rules, but you're not one of us?
Sure. Well, the whites were the whites. And then
so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So they would call it the woods, Pecker Woods.
Mm-hmm.
That's just your generalization in California of a white inmate. And then you had your niche brands, your Nazi lowrider skinheads, your Ventura skinhead dogs, these different factions of white gangs that were mostly white supremacist gangs to some degree. And then you had just your typical white inmate that was me, that didn't come in with any gang affiliation, wasn't claiming a peckerwood on the street, which would also be some type of white supremacist. So I was a part of the white car is what they called it. And I had to adhere at this maximum security yard to the rules that those in the back created for the yard, like the no hands policy. When I got my new cellmate, Rai from Ventura County, cool guy. Don't know what ever happened to him, but I had a lot of laughs with this guy. He was cool. He always used to tell me, he's like, it's a lot of fun in here, bro. He's like, but this is still prison. And he's like, it can get real any moment. And he had done time on 3 yards, which is still maximum security, pretty high politics. He was on the Corcoran 3 yard for a period of time. And I remember one day, one of my neighbors was a skinhead dog, and they were notorious for like doing like malicious shit on the street to people and women. And one of them was a guy, he had a ton of points, man. It was like 120 some points. And in prison, that's a lot of, like, people looked at him as like the Barry Bonds home run guy, but the fucking prison of points. And his thing was, I'm going to the shoe. Like, I'm not staying here long. So him and his cellmate, they were porters. So they got to work the floor, hand out stuff, clean things. They got outside cell access. We were on lockdown 23 and a half hours a day. They were not locking the cell door all the way. Like, this is how they were. This is how into the politics they were. We're at war with bulldogs. And these specific skinheads, like, their thing was to get a bulldog. Like, they hated bulldogs. So they wouldn't close the cell door all the way, hoping that the cop in the tower wouldn't see that the light was still on, that their cell was cracked. So one day it happened. The cell didn't close. A bulldog gets taken down the medical. This dude runs down the fucking tier, runs down the stairs. Cop's right there, squares up with this bulldog and starts going off on him. And everybody's like on the windows, like watching this happen, right? They're fighting the cops, and they get out. Nobody gets down. They're still fighting, spraying them with this pepper spray that was choking us out in our cell for hours, how strong it was, right? Still fighting with this pepper spray that was making it to where we couldn't breathe. Finally, the cop pulls out this block gun, is what they call it. And it's basically a wood block with a racquetball tip. And it's like a shotgun. And pow! Shoots and hits this dude in the leg, takes him down, and they stop. And I remember thinking, fuck, this is nuts. And I was like, bro. And he was like, bro, if that's ever you, he was like, you don't stop until somebody gets shot. You hear me? And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, bro, if you stop before you get shot or he gets shot, that dude's going to kill you. He doesn't fucking care about you. And they're supposed to kill you and you're supposed to kill them. And he was like, this is what I'm telling you, bro. At any moment, it can go off in here and it's serious. And I remember that it was one of those reality checks that like, you can have fun in there. You can really be in a good place. But in a moment's notice, it can go from like everything's okay to I might die right now because something's going to happen. Not long after that, somebody shot their line into our cell.
What's that? Which
basically they take a toothpaste and they empty it out. And then they stuff it with soap that was ground up and it hardens. So you have like a little box and they put a paper clip on it at the very end. It's like a hook and you hook a line to it and you shoot this thing out your door. And then other people shoot theirs out the door with the hook and grab it and you pull it in. Well, that's how you would send notes.
Okay.
And somebody banged on our thing and said, and they when you're next, they can like flip it around. It comes into your cell, comes into the cell. Ray starts reading it. I could see the look on his face. And I'm like, bro, what's wrong? And he was like, I got to do work. I'm going to go to yard. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, bro. And I was like, why? And he's like, somebody in here knows me from fucking Corcoran. And I was like, well, what the fuck did you do? And he's like, I didn't do something that I was supposed to do. He didn't give me the full details. He was like, but they jumped me and I didn't fight back. He's like, it was a heart check. He owed a heart check because when they fought him, he cowered, which you're not allowed to do. So because he cowered.
Now, is this your tough Nazi roommate?
He left. This is just another guy that would be similar to me, right?
Okay.
Drug addicted user on the streets and
who's not
getting caught up, and he's just a white dude in prison. And he's like, somebody on here knows me from Corcoran and knows I owe work, which is why the whole thing plays out the way it does, right? And we had to go to yard. We were going to get an opportunity to go to yard, and there was a guy on the tier who they said was a sex offender, and he had to go after him. But during that whole process of all this chaos, I was learning how to make my bed every single day because that was not something that I could do. But I had these rules that I had to do. But over time, I started to see the value of creating a routine for myself and these small things that I could control. Because up to that point, even when I was a child, I couldn't control anything because I didn't really have the internal parameters to understand how discipline in small things grows over time, like planting a seed and growing a tree. It grows and creates more branches. I couldn't discipline myself in brushing my teeth. And so I tell people the beginning of me going from prison to the Olympics was me learning how to brush my teeth every single day, then learning how to make my bed every single day, then learning how to organize my stuff every day, then learning how to be disciplined, which I tell people is my ability to do good work when I don't want to do good work at all.
Incredible. I thought you had read the Make Your Bed book.
I've been saying make my bed every single day long before that guy ever had a video.
Wow.
And anybody that's been following me since 2010 knows that that's been a part of my thing from the beginning because that's truly how it happened. Yeah. So I ended up serving 2 years, just under 2 years. But I went from that level 4 yard to a level 2 yard, which would be considered a Camp Snoopy yard. A bunch of people that were drug addicted and, you know, breaking into cars and stealing cars and doing commercial burglaries and low-level offenses that were going to go home in under 4 or 5 years. And it's totally different. It was dorms.
So can you explain to me like what the SHU program was? Because when you had mentioned it, it had like popped up in like other interviews too. And I was just, so when I Googled, because I was just like, because, you know, I was trying to verify if like what this guy was saying was true. So when I Googled it, it was like, oh, the SHU program could also be the same thing as the whole, but you're saying in California that's not it at all.
Not in California. In California, the whole is ADSEG, which is administrative segregation housing.
Mm-hmm.
You can go there for a fight. You can go there for drug possession. You can go there for drug sales.
Mm-hmm.
You can go there for stabbing and be let back out.
Even a stabbing, okay.
Yes. You may only do 3 months in the hole, which is basically just a cell block with inmates who are on timeout. A SHU program, though, is an extended period of ADSEG with even less access to what I would have access to, like toothbrushes. You don't get the toothbrush that I get. I can get a full toothbrush. In a SHU program, they know exactly what you're going to do with the toothbrush. You're going to sharpen it and turn it into a shank.
Okay.
You don't get a full thing of toothpaste. You don't get to hold on to your mail and write these letters. Like in some SHU programs in California, your mail was actually brought to you on a screen and you had to read it off the screen because inmates were getting, I can't remember what they called them, but like happy cards, where the person that sent them the card would melt the crystal meth into the letter. So when you licked it, you could get high off the substance that was leaked into the letter. Or they found out that, they were creating cryptic letters using different methods. And so if you held on to that, you could figure out
so
how
they let you read it and
then you're on. So and
definitely not getting tattoos in the SHU.
It's impossible because you go to yard and dog kennel. So you're on 23-hour lockdown, and you go to the yard for 1 hour, and you go in a dog kennel. You can't touch or get access to any other inmates. It's impossible. Even if you were an ADSEG would have been 23.5-hour lockdown, and you were only let out to go take a shower. But at that point, most inmates don't take showers. When you get into like maximum security, in my experience, most inmates prefer to take a bird bath, which is
why.
You're just comfortable in your cell. And that's how I got. You basically roll up like a mustard packet to a thin piece, and in the top of the sink, it had that little slit in there, and you'd put that mustard packet through the slit, and when you hit the button, and then you would just make a curtain in your cell so your cellmate didn't see you, and then you would just bird bath there, and you wouldn't have to leave your like little comfort zone. And that's what most inmates did when they were on lockdown, was take bird baths, because you'd work out in your cell and you couldn't go shower whenever you wanted. So things like getting tattoos and in the SHU program is, to me, foolishness. It's not possible. But I've never been there, and so I can't tell you what it's like seeing it. But you know about the SHU program when you get to a maximum security yard, because it's talked about and it's revered as a place that only the best criminals get to go to. You had a guy that had 120 some points and still wasn't serving a big chunk of his time in the SHU.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So not to get too controversial. So about Wes Watson, like I'm sure the guy's super successful, extremely disciplined, fitness, all these things helped a lot of people. But there is the one controversy about him doing time in the SHU program. It's just not.
I don't know the guy, and I've never spoke to the guy, and I don't know any of the guy's content because I've never followed him. I've just never. But the yelling and the screaming and kind of that really aggressive style has never been something that's resonated with me. And prison stories altogether really aren't that cool to me anymore at this point in my life. But there's people that had showed paperwork that said that this individual had done time in Arizona and Oklahoma. I will say this. When I came to prison, they were just getting ready to send inmates to Arizona and Oklahoma. I'm very aware how that program worked. I was not eligible to go to that program because I was in prison for armed robbery. You had to be a low-level drug offender, basically, to even be able to go to one of those yards. And you had to be on a level 1 or 2 yard. Nobody that was sentenced to a maximum security yard, which was a level 3 and level 4 facility, was able to leave the state to do their time. That's a fact. Now, if that changed, it could, but I doubt it. No state would want to take on a high-risk inmate and put them in a population in their prisons in their state. And so if those papers were true, then it would be a direct contradiction to what he was trying to display. And I would get it if you were trying to garner a big following and you kind of decided, hey, I'm going to stretch my story a little bit. But what I've learned is so long as he never goes back to prison, the chances of any kind of repercussions for stretching his story are really small. Now, if he went back and was in a California prison, there could be some repercussions there because somebody's not going to take that lightly, you know?
What else did you learn in prison that kind of molded you as like an adult later on?
Routine was the big one. Routine was the big one. The more time I did, the more routine I got. And routine, when you get to low level yards, Camp Snoopy yards, that's 1 and 2. There's not much routine. There's more chaoticness, a lot of drug use, a lot of gambling, a lot of drinking, and a lot of just wasting time. And there's no order. You don't work out together. You don't have that militant style. That doesn't change, though, for Southern Hispanics. So I was around a lot of Southern Hispanics in a California prison. And specifically, there was this guy, they called him Snapper. He was from Norwalk. And I always was interested in this guy. His gang, the gang he was from was called One Way. And I asked him one time, I said, why are you guys, why is this your symbol? And he says, we grew up on a one-way street. This was the one-way arrow. And I'm like, oh my God, these guys are coming up. And he was the first one up every time. He got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. His bed was immaculately made. When he opened his locker, everything was beautifully organized. He moved in the same way every single day. And a lot of the Southern Hispanics did the same thing. I always tell people, and this is not real, but it's almost like they all woke up together, brushed their teeth together, took shits together. Like they did everything with this very disciplined routine. And as I watched this guy, I was taking notes mentally. Like, I think I need that. I think I want to be up early in the morning like he is. I think I want to organize my stuff the way he does. And I think I need to consistently show up for myself the way he seems to show up. And then I started learning how to get up every day in early morning. And then it got to a point where I was, okay, I'm going to get up early. Now I'm going to get up 10 minutes before this guy. And this guy's going to wake up, and all of a sudden I'm going to be up before him, and my bed's going to be made, and I'm going to be on top of my bunk waiting for the day to start for me to get my work done. And I started to realize that was one of the biggest components that I was missing in my life in terms of being successful, not only in the external world, like which would be business or making money, but in the internal world, is I needed to have a system in place or parameters in place that could help me manage my internal world, just like I was learning how to manage the external world through these simple tasks that most people do and don't even think about, or don't do them and don't think how they can actually have a really big impact on their future in some great way. And so when I left prison, I had learned the art of discipline, structure, and routine, which is one of the sobriety models at PH Wellness. When you come to PH Wellness, all over our facilities are the PH pillars of sobriety. And 4, 5, and 6, discipline, structure, and routine exist on that. And it exists because of what I learned in prison. When I got out, I put it into play immediately. I just had to adapt what that discipline, structure, and routine looked like. And it was based on my goals that I was going to get into BMX and race professionally. I was on the cover of a magazine when I was 18 years old. So when I got out of prison at 25, I knew it hadn't been that long, and I thought I could do this. I was going to go to the Olympics, start a nonprofit for kids, and become a professional speaker. And so when I got out, I knew exactly what I was going to do, which was my plan. I knew exactly when and what I needed to do, which was structure. And my discipline was my ability to carry that out as soon as I got out. And in the treatment industry, the likelihood somebody stays sober when they leave residential treatment and don't immediately go into the next level of care or attach themselves to some type of sober living community, the likelihood that they make it is very slim.
Absolutely.
And it's no different for inmates. if you're not out and putting yourself into the community environment that's necessary for you to succeed, you're going to go right back to your old ways.
For sure. Yeah, it's like taking a plant out of a pot and not planting it somewhere else. You know, it can only last so long.
Yeah, and you have to take special care when you remove it from one pot to the next, right? Because it's a very crucial time. It's a very fragile time.
You got to make sure all the roots are there. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I got out, I went straight to work.
Interesting. What led you to wanting to open like your own rehab?
Originally, I didn't know that I wanted to open rehab. I started my nonprofit in 2012. I coached in the Olympics in 2016, made it to the highest level of racing, which was the Olympic level as a professional athlete, blew my knee out, lost my career right before 2012. By 2016, I'd also become one of the biggest substance use and mental health speakers in the world. So I had accomplished the 4 things that I said I was going to do when I was in prison. And then I got in this really blank moment of like, what's next? Like I've only got one thing now. It's like my speaking, and I have coaching still, but I needed to know what was next. And in 2018-ish, Chris was opening up his treatment center, and he was starting to back off from speaking because he was going to be spending more time in his treatment center. Well, I'm thinking this may be an opportunity for me to advance my speaking business because, well, if they're contacting you and you're not speaking anymore, I'll pay you a referral fee. Tell them about me, which I learned, even for somebody like Chris, right? He's got a treatment center. He's got a very good reputation for his sobriety in his treatment center. To refer things to me who he doesn't know could completely sour his reputation, because if I showed up high or relapsed, well, is Chris sober?
Or inappropriate or late,
whatever it is, right? And he had agreed originally, so I flew out there to his location, and he asked me something, and I have thanked him for this. He said, are you married? And I was like, nah. And he's like, you got a girl? And I was like, nah. And he's like, well, you're never going to have one, and you're never going to get married if this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Because he's like, what's next? And I was like, I don't know. Like, this is what I have. I love doing it. And that was when he said the girlfriend and the marriage thing. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he goes, you're going to do this, Hoff. And he look around. And that was the light bulb. I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm saving more money than I'm spending. I don't know why I'm saving it. I just know it's for something. And Chris was able to give me the nudge and the inspiration to say, when you're done with this, you have to retire and continue to do the work that you've been doing for communities all around the country, but you need to do it for a small community of people that you build, and they come to you. And so in 2020, I got a phone call from my business partner, Matt Paz, PH Wellness. P, Matt Paz, H, Hoffman. He says, I want to start a treatment center. And I said,
how do you know him?
He came on my podcast in like 2018, 17.
He's a recovery guy.
In recovery. He's got over 10 years himself. His recovery went 12 steps and a huge fitness thing, like Ironman athlete, triathlete.
Crazy.
He's crazy. Follow him. He's up at 4:00 every single day.
It's crazy.
He burns 500 calories before 5:30 in the morning. Like they're a different breed. He says, I want to start a treatment center. I say, well, I know this lady who's a consultant, and they take your hand and they do all the back end work.
Yeah.
You focus on the business. I'll focus on getting the license and everything. So you don't have to worry about that. And he's like, nah, man, we're starting a treatment center. And I was like, bro, I'm saving my own money to start my own program, because I don't want somebody doing something that isn't ethically and morally and in the direction that I want it to be. And I said, I want to create something where there's opportunity after treatment, specifically jobs. And he was like, I think you need to fly out to California, bro. I want you to meet Barry, who's going to also be in on this. He owns a gigantic countrywide staffing agency. And immediately I was like, maybe this is happening for a reason. And it did, because there was no way I was going to do this on my own. No way. I flew out to California. I started to see that the stars were aligning, and that day we all shook hands and said, we're going to start the treatment center. And then I told Matt, I don't care about anything but branding and clinical. So the logo was, and the branding was all of my doing, and the clinical design of how we were going to run our organization and provide the highest level of care that could be provided in the country was under the direction of myself. And then Matt, who is the CEO, is the culture king, is making sure the employees understand that we're here to change lives, that they're not on their phones, and that we give people chances, communication matters, and really kind of cultivating an employee culture that allows people to come to the treatment center and want to leave the reviews that we get. And that is, there's something different about this place.
For sure.
Right. And so that's the plan.
That's whenever someone's like, oh, what do you know about the treatment? So I'm like, go look at the reviews, because it's like, let me tell you something. If you buy a car and you have a bad experience with a car, you can bribe that person or fix it to write a good review.
Yep.
When drug addicts go to treatment, they have nothing going on in the world. They will burn your place down, leave 1,000 reviews. You can bribe them. They're going to take the money. Then they're going to repost it.
Yes.
And get more money. No drug addict is going to be bribed.
The way I would say it is the worst type of reviewer for a restaurant is nothing in comparison to a person who's drug addicted.
Oh.
Your willingness to cut somebody's throat when your brain is still in active addiction mode,
revenge,
is really
victim.
high. So for us to, have almost 70 reviews and be 5 stars, it means a lot to us.
Yeah.
And as owners, we're engaged with our employees and with our clients. I come and run groups. When individuals leave the treatment center, my business card is available. I have individuals that contact me every single day who've gone through my treatment center. Now you might think, well, how does that work in sustainability? Because aren't all these people calling you? No, it's actually no different than when I tell a kid, if you message me on Instagram, I promise you, I'll reply to you. I reply to every message. You would think those kids would be like, hey, Tony, hey, Tony, hey, Tony, hey, Tony. It's not. They ask me a question and they go. And that's okay. With the treatment, not everybody contacts me because not everybody wants recovery the way I want it. It's when I come in there and I do a group and they're like, I like this recovery. It's like, well, we go to 12-step meetings, right? And I always tell people, just listen. You'll hear the person that you identify with. And I was like, that's the recovery you want. The one where you feel like you get them, your story is very similar, and you like the way that they present the solution. Go after that. And all you have to do if you want that is learn how to think the way that they think. And that's what I tell people. If you want what I have, all you have to do is learn how to think the way that I think. Because that is going to be the beginning of my speaking, my doing, my habits, and my character. And my character is my results.
Yeah, and it's crazy how like your perception, like when I first went to meetings, I'd always find something wrong with the meeting. I'd always leave saying, well, I didn't like this, I didn't like that, and then I learned how to turn any situation positive. And there's times where I would go to a meeting and me and this other person went to the same meeting and they hated it and I loved it.
Yeah. And
it's like, maybe I didn't like love the speaker that much, but I would focus on the couple things that I liked. And then when I was younger, I was like okay with like church. Like my mom used to take me to church or whatever. And then like I grew up like really resenting church and hating church. And I became one of these people that would like, mock it and just, I just thought it was ridiculous and like adults with imaginary friends and like these make-believe stories. And I just didn't like church. But when I got clean, there was times where I felt like using, there wasn't like a meeting to go to. And I would just go to random churches because I didn't know where else to go. And I was scared of just driving around,
Yeah.
And I think like around 3 years clean, I started to go to church again. And I used that same mentality. And there was times where I would go to church with like a friend and they would be like, well, they said this and this made no sense. And then I'd be like, I didn't even focus on that. Yeah, that wasn't even, you didn't hear all the other stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I had realized like, wow, I can go anywhere and get something now.
Yeah.
And one of my close childhood friends became like a pastor and I still go to his church all the time. He's still a close friend of mine. And grew to really like enjoy the Bible. Like I used to, Like when I first got clean, I was all into like Buddhism and like anything but Christianity because it's so popular. And I wanted to like,
Well, and you had a resentment from youth.
of course, you know?
Yeah.
And when I started, it was weird because I'd heard these stories before. When I heard them with like 4 or 5 years clean, they started to really
Resonate. Makes sense.
There were times where I would tear up and cry.
Yes.
And I'm like, I know the story, but it was just hitting me because I was open.
Yeah.
And when did like your relationship with like Christianity start to impact your life?
So I had a spiritual awakening January 21st, 2007. If you want to know the testimony, you can dig through my Instagram and you'll see parts of it that break down kind of the testimony. I don't want to do that here, but January 21st, I have a spiritual awakening. That is the beginning of my surrender. When I surrendered, I was then sentenced. I went to jail the next day, January 22nd. 30 days later, I'm on my way to prison. I surrendered the very, very first night that I was at Wasco State Prison after I read that quote. For me, surrender meant that I was no longer going to externally process the world around me, which meant I would go to places to try and confirm a belief system I didn't even know was actually driving every part of my life. That was my thinking, my speaking, my doing, etc. I was no longer going to try and go to church and find fault. I was going to start processing life internally, which meant I am responsible for everything that's happening in my life right now, even if I didn't specifically cause it. What I needed was the instruction of how I was going to take this newfound faith, and what I found was Jesus Christ. That was the power greater than myself that I served. I had this really big book, but if you've ever read the Bible, it's like the hardest math equation ever. It really takes instruction from somebody who understands that. I kept reading the Bible. I was able to pray and meditate, but I wasn't able to actually understand the fullness of the Bible until I met a man at Avenel State Prison who was an African-American gentleman. His name was Toby Wade, who became the greatest mentor in my life. And this will give you also another example of how much different lower level yards are. There was enough leniency that a white boy was able to sit down with a black man and study the Bible. Level 3 and 4 yard, that would have never happened, bro. Never. This man is the one that opened up the fullness of God's word to me, right? Where I wasn't picking apart stories. I was diving deeper into the mechanics of what God was asking from us as his people, because all of us are his people. And that is the ability to discipline ourselves to these spiritual principles or this perspective, right? I didn't understand the art of perspective being reality before I really dove into wanting to live a life of spirituality, right? Because if perspective is reality, well, then where does our perspective come from? Does it come from a very narrow-minded, negative, pessimistic belief about myself and others? Or does it come from this very open and never-ending perspective of vastness? And in this world of vastness, what's possible? What's your role? What are you supposed to do? And what did I give you that you're supposed to give back to others and use to enhance the fullness and never ending of this vastness? And so while I was in prison, I was kind of cultivating this relationship with God based on the Bible, not some preacher that my parents brought me to, which I think was a big benefit for me because I didn't develop a resentment to God because I was never put in front of an institution that could pervert the word and what it was actually asking us. And that was really to just love others as we love God, and that love was the fullness of itself. And so I chased after the idea of what was the ministry of Jesus Christ and how am I supposed to take the teachings and ministry of Jesus Christ and apply it to myself. And ever since then, I'm like you, dude. I can go anywhere and it's like, yo, that's what you got out of that? Like you didn't get all of this other stuff. And it was because I surrendered. I surrendered myself. I don't need to find fault in the world. What I'm looking for is what I can use internally in the world that people can't see. Because when I master the art of myself, that is my emotions, my feelings, my beliefs, then the world also becomes this vastness that God created for us, in which I can move in places, people, places, and things, and be at a place where I'm always growing. I'm always becoming greater, because even if I'm hurt in the process, I process it in a way that has nothing to do with you. So what was my lesson in this? And so it all started in prison. And since then, it's just been a journey of going deeper and deeper into these spiritual realms of understanding myself and others and how I can just love more.
What was it about like the teaching of Jesus that, or like some of the things that you started to resonate like with your life? Because like for me, when I would hear about like Christianity growing up, like I never understood like the lessons, but then like, and I think it's because I had like this outside perspective, but then like when I try to like, when I read it myself or heard it told to myself, it was like, dude, there's this guy who's looks homeless, you know, in a time where like, the kings and the most spiritual people were the opposite. They were trying to be like super polished, clean. They wouldn't spend time with anyone who wasn't of their class. And they wouldn't like touch someone who wasn't like impure. And there was like a lot of
legalism.
Yeah, exactly. And I have this friend who's really into Christianity, and I used to tell him like, oh, can you believe this person like did me dirty or whatever? And he would be like, bro, they did Jesus dirty. You know? He would be like, you think they care about you?
Yeah.
Bro, you think you were betrayed? Bro, they betrayed Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, and he would just get so, and I you know, and like, I couldn't be negative with him.
Sure.
Because he just would be like, bro, like, if they did this to the one God's son, what is the world like? Who are you to the world?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And if he was able to take it on the chin, you're going to act like a little baby.
Yep.
You know?
And he's not wrong. I always appreciate the Jesus freak that goes that far. And for me, Jesus was the fullness of selflessness, right? He knew his purpose in the world. He gave selflessly, and he loved courageously. He never judged anybody. He met people exactly where they were at in their life, and he presented something to them that the world couldn't give them. And that was empathy. It was compassion. It was grace. It was this idea that the meekness shall inherit the earth, right? Is you can follow the works of me, and where you're going to go at the end of those works is a place that you want to be, not because hell is so scary, but because the freedom and fullness of what I have to offer is on the pathway of my life. And that was probably what has inspired me the most about Jesus, and why I have no problem standing against Christians that condemn gays or women that are having abortions, and really challenge them, because what I read of Jesus was he was sitting down with the attorneys, the quote unquote sinners or women that were going to be getting abortions or sleeping around. And yet you're saying we're supposed to condemn them, and that's supposed to be saving them somehow. It's never made sense to me, because what I read from Jesus was that you selflessly work in this world to benefit others, and that through faith, God has a calling in your life, just like he had called Jesus to his ministry to accomplish what he accomplished, which was to be crucified on the cross, to show people that the laws of the Old Testament that gave you rules actually blocked people from being able to have faith, because they thought that it was an accomplishment of following the law that gave you access to God, which Jesus was actually trying to say, it's not through that, it's through the faith that God is here, that he has a calling in your life. There are talents that you're supposed to selflessly give to the world, and that we understand we are not the source. Our source is in a place that we're going to be at some day in our life. And in the process of our lives, we're going through the refinement of developing more Christ-like qualities. And you're where you're at, I'm where I'm at, she's where she's at, and y'all are where you're at. And it's not my job to tell you you're not where you're supposed to be. It's my job to step in front of you and show you what you can be, or you show me what I can be. And we work together to, as I say, iron sharpens iron. And so Christianity in Christ to me is really this level of selflessness that the world doesn't operate by. Right? Because the world is about what I just said on my Instagram not too long. It's consumerism now, especially Western culture. What can I get? What can I take? Where can you take me? What can I get from you? And there's no fulfillment in that, at least for me, at least.
Yeah. And when people like argue this, I always like look back where like in the Bible, it's like there's no greater sin. So it's like the way that I see it is that like, if you run a red light or break some type of rule or you hit someone in the face, basically in like the spiritual world, you can't measure that.
No.
Because the idea of measurement's a human construct, because we needed to we needed to conduct our lives, because without measurement we couldn't know how to wake up or whatever. But like even time is a made up thing. Like time doesn't exist, only clocks exist, you know. So in the spiritual world, it's infinite, it's never ending, it's forever and ever. You couldn't even measure it if you wanted to. And then you can't measure what people do to each other, because like but we do it to have some type of justice. Okay, you raped this girl, you get 4 years in prison, 6 years in prison. But that doesn't
exist.
You couldn't. Yeah, you killed 17 people, we're gonna kill you. You can't.
No. Here's the way I put it. So think of Jesus or God as this gigantic well that we can't even put a size on how big this well or lake is. And inside this lake is truth, power, love, forgiveness, all of the good things in life. Sin is what they call it, which is a hard term to use, is what breaks the continuity or connection we have to this well of water. It doesn't matter what you do. Jesus said, if you and I look at a woman and we're like, yeah, that's nice, that instantly breaks the channel. The better we get at disciplining ourselves away from activities that break the channel or continuity or the strength of the signal into this well, the deeper we get an understanding of life and the more free we can move in the world, because we start to become free from the things that take us away from fulfillment and put us into a place of discontention. And so really what we're trying to do is not judge others, because the Bible says is we should remove the speck from our own eye before we try to remove yours. That means I'm not focused on what your shortcomings are. I'm focused on telling you I'm here to support you. If you need me, I'm here for you, and that you can do this because here's what I've been able to do. Because what I've been able to do is try and remove the things that can, for a moment's time, disconnect me from this well of truth, this well of power, this well of love. And the better I get at that, the more it's flowing into me, and the more it's transforming me, and the more it's giving me this ability to go into the world and make a deeper impact and not be so affected by what's happening in the world. And so that's the way I've seen it. I hate to see sin as this thing that's taking you to hell. To me, behaviors that are contrary to the truth are just disconnecting you from the well that's going to bring you fulfillment, peace, happiness, joy, love, the things I want everybody to experience. And those are things that you can't buy. Those are things that you have to earn through selflessly removing yourself from what we see as the purpose of life. Getting up, having families, and buying cars, and getting jobs, and listening to your favorite music, and actually asking yourself, is there a deeper part to life? Because there is. And there's things that disconnect us from that deeper part of life.
And I think it's individual, because it's like I've noticed that you curse, right?
Yeah.
So you're somebody who's like Christian, believes in Jesus, and curses. And I'm sure some people have said to you, oh, well, you shouldn't curse, or have you ever thought about not cursing or whatever? And to you, this is like, well, this is who I authentically am.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know what your reason is, but it's like, maybe this is just something you don't see as a problem, or you're fine with, or whatever. But it's like, to me, it's like when someone judges somebody for having an abortion, it's like that judgment is almost, well, in the Bible, it would say just as bad as the abortion, because the sin is just the same thing.
It's a disconnection. It doesn't matter. It's just a disconnect. There's no level to the disconnect. It disconnects you. So why would you judge a person that maybe having a problem with a behavior that's disconnecting them when you doing that is actually disconnecting you? Yeah. And it's very clear.
They
there
just
is
sin
no
differently.
Yeah, they just sin differently. And so I do cuss. I am a human being. I actually didn't cuss for a long time.
Interesting.
Because when I got to prison and I was transferred from Tehachapi level 2, they flipped it to a PC yard, so all the general pop had to leave. Danny Payton, who is a friend of mine still, he's gotten out, done well, was a 2-striker. We were in R&R getting ready to leave, and when we got to Avenal Yard 5, where I finished out my sentence in 2008, he was like, "Bro, you have a foul mouth," and I'm in prison. He's like, "You cuss so much," and from that point forward, I actually didn't cuss for years.
Wow.
And then there became a point where I found a middle ground. I don't cuss all the time, but I don't use cuss words to demean. I just use them as an emphasis. It's a vocabulary word. It's a word that I use in my vocabulary to put emphasis on certain things that I'm saying. And so if God's going to condemn me for that, I'm okay with that.
And it's even like I have a friend who he also didn't curse for years, and he's, in the religion world, and he speaks a lot. And when he's off camera and stuff, he'll curse with me. And and it's so funny because I'll talk to him and he's just like, "Man, there's times where I want to say things and I want to do things, but I just don't want to deal with the drama of it being up there, and you don't know who's listening, and I don't want people with their kids to be in the audience or whatever." And he told me, he was like, "I'm not being fake. There's just some times where it's not appropriate."
Sure.
And to me, I was like, "Wow, that's so cool," because for me, I would be like, "Oh, you're different than when you're on stage." To him, it would be like
knowing your audience,
being professional. I was a CEO for a long time. There are people at my job that would be like, "Man, Bryan, does he ever crack a joke?" Because I was young when I started my career, so I wanted to be taken seriously. So a lot of times when my employees would joke or banter or whatever, I wouldn't take part because I'm supposed to be the guy in charge.
It's culture.
So if the guy in charge is the one leading the banter and the joking around and whatever, and I was so young that I wanted to be overly professional.
Sure.
And I wanted the respect that I would get, if I was, 40 or 50 years old guy who owned a business.
Yeah.
And as soon as I would drive off, I'd be blasting Kodak Black.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, and it wasn't that I was being fake. It's that there's a profession. Who you are at work shouldn't be who you are at home.
Sure.
And I struggle with that because, like, in recovery, we're taught, like, don't have a double life or whatever. And like, even in therapy, like I learned a lot about, like, as long as, like, my close friends and my sponsor know everything that's going on, like, not everything is for everybody.
That's right.
And
that's okay. Your path, my path, they don't have to be the same. There are obviously going to be similarities, and we learn to accept that for the way it is. If I went to a church and spoke, you would never hear me cuss.
Of course.
Right? Because the audience is in a place where many of them may have been working on that, and they don't want to be introduced to that, right? And the Bible says, if you make somebody stumble, you might as well tie an anvil to your neck and jump off of a boat and go down to the bottom of the water, because you're making another Christian stumble. And so we have to be careful about that. But at the same time, I also just want to be me. God's given me the way I do things and the gifts that I have and how that I present to them. And I'm working with people who don't want to see perfect. They want to see a person who's similar to them, who's crossed a bridge that they don't even think exists at that point in their life. And if I say the F word or some words here and there, and that helps them realize that, Tony's made these great changes, but he's not this perfect version that's way out of reach for me, then that's great. I'm going to do that. That's why I'm not going to stop to some degree, but also not be flying off the handle, because I do got 12-year-olds that follow me, 13-year-olds that follow me. And I need to be a good example of a leader to them. But we're also in a world today where cuss words are when it's appropriate, right? You don't go to school and cuss at the teacher. You don't go to the place of work and cuss at your boss, right? You can use cuss words in an environment that it's safe and you're using it as a part of your
Mhm.
vocabulary to emphasize words. And that to me is what it's about.
Yeah, and like I would follow Gary Vee for a long time, and he curses so much. And to him, it's like this is the real fucking world.
Yeah.
If you go fucking do business with some sharks, they're gonna be fucking cursing. People are excited or motivated, and that's just how he talks.
Yeah.
And
And you can tell that is how he talks.
yeah, for sure. It seems all super genuine. He's not like trying to curse.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
It's like when Frisella uses the MFer.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't, it's not the meaning.
Yeah.
It's just his way of saying you or another person.
And it might not be for everybody. So it's like, it blows my mind how many people waste their time on Instagram trying to change somebody's view.
Mhm.
Like if I'm super pro Trump and you start coming at me why I'm a piece of shit, like I've never had anyone say, you know what, I was really pro Trump, but this liberal DM'd me all these hateful things, and now I'm super liberal.
Yeah.
Like no one's ever changed their perspective through that. So it's like, it blows my mind that people argue in comments and stuff like that with other people where you can just change the channel and just go watch whatever is going to be soothing for you. Like,
Well, if you want to know what peace and freedom truly is about, it's when you can read something that opposes how you believe something and consider it. Why do they think that? Do I need to think that? Does that align with anything I think? No. Okay. I'm done.
Yeah.
That's freedom. Total discontention and chaos is the person that reads something against what they believe.
And
it's so hot and boiling, they have to spew it. You're messed up. You're a bigot.
Could you believe
You're a
this
misogynist.
idiot? Yeah.
He's a con artist. How could you be involved in this? And you would vote for that guy. Well, that means X, Y, and Z now. They don't even know you. They don't even know where you're from, what you do, if you're a good person.
And like most of our beliefs are just because we were born in a certain area.
Exactly.
If you were born in middle of America in this certain area, there's like a 90% chance you're going to vote this way.
Yep.
And if you're born in Southern California, there's a 80% chance you're going to vote this way. Not to say that you can't change and have your own thoughts, but there are so many things that you aren't even in control of just because where your first 15 years of life took place.
Yep.
That, like my therapist is like really world traveled. And like when I talk to him, he'll be like, this wouldn't be an issue if you were in Spain. Like you wouldn't even be able to have judgment on yourself about this because it doesn't exist over there.
Yeah, you would think it.
You wouldn't even. And to him, he would be like, they have like siesta and like they don't like work as hard. And like in America, it's like we have 100,000 people talking about waking up at 4 a.m,
Or 1.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, he's like, dude, in Spain, this isn't even, you wouldn't even desire this.
Yeah.
So this is literally just an issue because you're born here.
That's right. And that's God guilt is the same way with Christians.
For sure.
They are born in a church that teaches them to feel shame and condemnation when they make a mistake according to how the way God works is used against them. Somebody has to teach you the way to think. Somebody has to teach you the way to respond. I mean, I think that's what's a great thing about conversations regarding social justice right now is people being more open to hearing another side and how redlining neighborhoods and creating poverty has also created a behavior and mindset that was out of their control in the beginning. You're talking about individuals that were freed from not even being able to have an education and then forced to go into neighborhoods that they didn't want to necessarily be in, with no access to getting into neighborhoods that had a higher level of thinking, and then told survive. And you will not have a way to partake in our life because you don't deserve of it. Well, that survival creates a certain type of product when the only thing you can do is use an instinct to stop yourself from being hungry or uncomfortable, because you become willing to do things that other people that grew up in different environments with different skills and tools, not because they were better, but because they had access to it, you end up becoming willing to do things that they would never do. And then now all of a sudden, many years later, we have this conversation about let's think deeper about what we know of psychology and
Mhm.
what this is really created, is because it's a culture thing.
For sure. And it could be genetic, ancestral. So I read Malcolm Gladwell has so many good books, but in one of his books, they did this study about like aggressiveness with people. And they could track people's aggressiveness by where their ancestors lived and whether they farmed or had cattle. Now, if you farmed, you were less aggressive because no one can come and steal your produce, right?
To the degree that you can't make a living or eat.
Exactly. So people, and it would take all day. You couldn't just
Yeah.
steal someone's farm, but cattle,
Mhm.
you could steal easily. So these people had to be strong and tough and aggressive in the town, because if you were weak or soft, someone would be like, oh, we'll just go take their fucking cattle in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the night, you might hear somebody. And then if you fought, shot at, did something, people are like, oh, don't fuck with that guy's cattle.
Right.
But if you're a farmer, you didn't have to be like that. So this goes on for generations. Your whole family are farmers and they're not aggressive people. And your whole family had cattle and they're aggressive people. And then it's like the 1960s
Yeah.
and they're doing tests on aggressiveness. And there's a kid in school who gets pushed and he just says, hey, watch where you're going. And there's another kid who gets pushed and they do like a real study.
Yeah.
And his first reaction is to grab the kid and punch
Fire
him.
back. Yeah.
And they were able to say that this kid's family was cattle and this other person was farmers. And it's like, you know, you don't think about that.
No, that's
know what I
actually
mean?
super interesting.
Yeah, it's
because if you take the model of evolution,
cool. Mm-hmm.
that's really all it is. I don't think that evolution is exclusive from God.
Mm-hmm.
While there are people that think that everything was just off this Big Bang Theory and
Mhm.
evolved over billions of years, I would agree with a lot of that, especially when you take something like this. But I don't think it's exclusive or not because of God
Mhm.
or God had no part in it. Is that that's how survival works. And to evolve into
Mhm.
a place where you could survive back in the day with cattle, you had to be more aggressive and protective over your property. And so your seed or your family tree created those traits because they were developed into the DNA
Mhm.
as the brain was developing and creating certain chemicals and response patterns. That gets kind of hardwired into your DNA, and then you pass that down and they
Mhm.
see it as they're growing up before their brain's even developed, and they model the behavior that they see because that's how they've learned how to survive,
Mm-hmm.
is by doing exactly that, which is also interesting because in the Bible, the biblical Assyrians were Germans, which we know the Germans are war machines.
Mhm.
Well, in the Bible, the Assyrians were also war machines.
Mm.
That's what they did. They were willing to go to war to try and conquer and take over and divide land,
Mhm.
in which I found when I started studying kind of the historical and geographical layers of the Bible, is how today some of the things that we see in the history of even modern society
Mhm.
is still replicating some of those things that you might even see in the biblical days.
Yeah, it's crazy because when you like read the Bible and like you really get into like the history of like the war that's going on, it's like those same wars are still going on over the land and whatever. And like we're not that far off. And one thing that I always try to like help people get is like so many people are like, oh, like so I don't like when people are like, our generation is getting worse and worse and worse and like all these things where it's like, you know, like in comparison to what? You know, hundreds of years ago where like people were like raped and murdered in like the middle of the Coliseum. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, 100 years ago where like we had slaves,
Mhm.
you know, 60 years ago women couldn't vote, you know, so it's like
The challenges are different.
but every generation has their own
Well,
thing,
yeah, sure.
you know.
Well, and if you didn't have those challenges, then these new challenges to you don't make sense.
Mhm.
Me and my dad talk about politics quite a bit, and my dad used to be a pretty staunch conservative before conservatism became this brand for white supremacy and stuff that's
Mhm.
the media has tried to paint it out to be, which in my experience, many conservatives I've met are not white supremacists. They're not against people coming into our country from other places and so forth. But my dad and I often talk about, you know, the Reagan era, right? What conservatives would consider the golden era of being conservative. And I
Mhm.
always tell my dad, and we talk about it, it's like, Dad, you guys didn't have access to the information.
Mhm.
This country has always done pretty shady stuff
Mhm.
to get its quote unquote job done. you guys just didn't get to see everything that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's obviously a conspiracy theory with Contra Costa, which was that Reagan could not fund the war that he wanted to fund through the government. So he did it through the CIA and buying cocaine from the Colombians and selling it into the black neighborhoods, which created the crack epidemic.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah. We're Rick Ross.
And they, so they, and now you also can look that up and they can say that there's no proof that ever happened, but there was no information for them available at that time to even consider or understand enough about why these wars were going on and what was happening. Where in today's world, we have the ability to see some of these wars, see what's happening and go, wait a minute, why is this happening? Why are we funding this? Why are we even involved in this? Where before the only thing you got was a newspaper, and that newspaper was controlled by an individual that wanted you to have a perception that they were giving you, so you backed what they were doing. So the challenge is today, I see, is that we have more information than we've ever had. We have more diversity in Western culture than we've ever had. And you have a baby boomer generation that really, for lack of better terms, took the United States through some post-war revolutions, if you will, to the prosperity of the United States as an economic superpower and war machine, to now where you have way more diversity, way more diversity in thought, way more diversity in financial gain. And it's confusing, and it's because it's creating different challenges for you, for me, for the Gen Z individuals, and for the older person. It don't make no sense to them. Well, you're programmed from here, and you stopped allowing yourself to evolve. And this is where you're going to allow yourself to end, instead of trying to process all these different challenges and say, what's different about this compared to what we had, and how do we continue to be part of the solution?
Well, it's like I have friends now who have kids, and they're like, dude, I can't believe the music they're listening to, they don't make music like they used to. And it's like, dude, you don't think your parents thought the same thing when rap music became a thing and they were used to AC/DC or whatever? And you don't think their parents thought the same thing when they're listening to like demonic Motley Crue and stuff like that? So it's like almost every generation
same thing
judges the other one. And then it's like, okay, people are like, oh, well, this generation is too soft. Yeah, that's because the previous generations beat our kids.
Yes.
And were too rough and didn't talk about our emotions. So like the pendulum is going to swing, and then it's going to swing and it's going to right itself. And then it's like the generation we're complaining about, we're the ones who raised them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like there's that cause and effect. And
I love the pendulum analogy, by the way. It's so true. It's going to swing to the left. It's going to swing to the right. And at some point, it's going to mellow out towards the middle. And that's where the truth and peace and understanding is. I use that with the homeless population, right? We have this overly conservative swing of the pendulum. Put them in jail.
Yeah.
Every person that uses drugs is sleeping on the street, put them in jail. Then we got to a place where we're like, whoa, we're overcrowding our prisons with these people that just had 3 grams of cocaine or were smoking crack and they're in prison for 10 years. Like we can't afford to keep them there that long. Then it swings all the way to the left, right? Because it went all the way up to the top of the right. And there's a lot of momentum for the pendulum to swing back the other direction. And that is, oh, but they grew up in a neighborhood that was redlined and they were in the foster care system, or their dad used to beat them up, or they were raped as a child. Let them just be in the street. We need to have compassion about their story and their position. And so let's build tents and
let's give them free heroin.
Let's give them free heroin. and that's an extreme, and syringes, but there's no accountability on either side. You've really done the same thing. Put them in jail. You don't have to take care of them, help them, so to speak. If you leave them on the street,
now they're ruining the community.
They're ruining the community, but you also don't have to help them if that's we care about them, so we leave them there. They have the freedom of choice, and we don't want to take that away from them. At some point, the pendulum swings in the middle and says, okay, if we're going to have safe injection sites, you don't get to use outside of this safe injection site if you're not in a house. So if you're on the street and we see you using dope outside of this injection site, guess what? You're going to jail. And we're going to sentence you to an institution that you can't leave from, and you're going to receive long-term treatment.
Which is expensive.
But if we don't do that, the homeless population is going to continue to grow. There has to be a place where accountability is in the middle of these two extreme pendulum swings, but you can't get there until the pendulum swings.
But it's also not sustainable. So it's like, I think that we're just all looking for perfection, and it's just, it might happen for like this little period of time, and then there's going to be this new so like with Tesla, oh, now we're not going to freaking have all this gas in the air and pollution. Okay, then the batteries are like,
well, yeah. So we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out what long-term exposure to electricity waves or frequencies are going to do to us, and then at some point we're going to get away from that source of energy because of the negative effects it has. And you can read about that with like solar farms. Solar farms are really great until you find out that it's killing birds that fly by.
Well, I didn't know that.
Go look it up.
Wow.
And how hot it makes things because the sun reflects off of these solars. So it's like solar farms also have a negative effect.
Every cause has an effect.
Yeah. If you take heroin, you lose your feelings. When you stop it, there's a rebound where you have all of your feelings and you're sore. If you take steroids, you get really big. When you get off of them, what happens? You get really small. Everything has a cause and effect.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think what made 12-step meetings really attractive to me is because when I would go to church, I would see like perfect people. Like they just looked, I didn't know them, but like I thought they were perfect. And there was like this thing. And meetings was the first time where I could see someone who was like still struggling to pay rent, angry, raising their hand, pissed off, breaking up with their girlfriend, not so happy, but like 7 months clean. And I was like, okay, so like I didn't have to shoot for perfection, but I had a winning chance. I was like in the game. I was like, this is cool. And then later on, I started to realize that there are people all over the world that are like this. So like one of my most spiritual friends ever, very Christian, right? He married this girl, and he told me that he waited. They didn't have sex the whole time. So I'm like, dude, how do you marry a girl and not have sex? They're like, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
And he told me, he's like, we slipped up a couple times. And I had never even thought that was a possibility. You're like the most spiritual person ever. Yeah. But the fact that you can have a couple little mistakes and reel it in.
Yeah.
And if
it was a couple.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? But like, to me, it was like, it made me feel like, oh, you're human.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
and
what
you can be human.
And when I talk to kids, I really kind of frame how tough 12, 13, 14 was for me because my emotional world started to develop, which was also the cognitive thinking realm of my world. And then this time in which we're in the early 90s, there is no vulnerability. Gays can't even come out of the closet. Families are expected to be perfect. Everybody's blessed. Go to church on Sundays. I'm blessed. God is so good.
The fake wave.
Yeah, but dad's beating the hell out of mom when they get home.
And drunk.
Drunk. And mom's cheating on dad. Dad's cheating on mom. The brother's struggling with drug addiction and has left the house, but nobody talks about anything, right? And I talk about how the generation they're growing up in is built on vulnerability, emotional intelligence. But we still have to create environments, communities where we accept the idea that there is no such thing as connection, strength, and hope without vulnerability. And that's our ability to communicate openly that we see in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because we understand that if we hold on to certain things, those secrets will always have power over us. We never have the true strength, hope, and courage to overcome our shortcomings until we sit down with somebody else that says, dude, let me tell you about my stuff. This is where I started. This is where I was at. This is how I'm getting here, or I'm 7 months sober, don't have a job, my husband's leaving me, I want to drink, but the only thing I know is to show up into these rooms and get around people that can love me in this moment when I feel like completely blowing into pieces emotionally and going back out and drinking. And you think, well, shit, I get this. If they're doing it, just like you said, I got a shot at this, is because you get to see perfection in its imperfections. And that really is just our ability to communicate with somebody in a safe space that says, yo, I don't got it all together. I'm winging this just like you. But here's how I managed this certain situation, and I was able to get out of it without picking up and using. Here's how I was able to get out of this situation without losing my marriage. How I was able to get out of this situation without losing my house because I lost my job. And we can take that blueprint and say, maybe this will work for me, and I'll take parts of it and I'll apply it to my life. And then what do? We turn around and we share that with somebody else. If we don't have that vulnerability, then what's the roadmap? If you're not perfect, you're fucked. And if you're fucked, you're out of hope. So who cares? Why should I even try? Because I can't meet the standard of this. It's impossible. And that's where, a lot of the work that I do is to try and break that down. It's like, we need to know what our stories are.
Yeah.
We need to get to a place where we create systems and infrastructure in society that are for mental health and struggles, for addiction struggles, for sex struggles, for violence and anger struggles, and recognize that every one of us are falling short in some area. But a true community, true society is built on the vulnerability and understanding that what we do is create systems for every person's struggle, and the idea that you're not alone. Because if you're alone, you got no hope.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse than a person that has nothing to lose.
I know. It's crazy.
Nothing worse, bro.
I know when people see like these school shooters and stuff like that, it's like, it sounds crazy, but like when I was a young kid, dude, I didn't care about anything. I probably wasn't going to shoot up a school, but like
nothing to lose.
I had nothing my childhood wasn't even as traumatic as some other kids. And I don't have severe mental health issues. But if I had severe mental health issues and my family wasn't strong, I might as well. I was that far gone as a kid where I didn't care about anything. I had nothing to lose, like you said. And you watch what goes on today, like with the school shootings, and it's like that's like another thing that happens in the current generation where the past generation is like, this never happened. We also don't have serial killers. You realize like serial killers went away.
Yeah.
So it's like there's some type of monster that brews in the recipe of the culture for every generation.
Sure.
And I think that with mental health and all this stuff becoming more talked about, that's actually the remedy for school shootings at its core, is
community, vulnerability. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
100%. Because the other thing too is there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. A lot of people that are not like us believe that everybody on the street that's talking out loud and yelling is drug induced, not realizing that many of those individuals
70%
are not drug induced. For example, we had a young man, a good dude, come to our treatment center. His mental health acuity was beyond what we could treat. We needed to transfer him to a mental health primary facility where his schizophrenic episodes could be managed through psychiatric care. The guy ended up leaving and was in the orchards next to our property, the citrus orchards, for 4 days. Came wandering out of the orchards one morning, and my program director is like, yo, this dude just came out of the orchards. And he's talking about people seeing him and this and these paranoid episodes of stuff he thinks is happening. And I said, well, bring him in, get him inside the house. And I was like, UA him, test him, clean, no drugs. People really have to understand some of these individuals that are on the streets are there because we are failing as a society to provide them with institutions that we can take care of them in.
Or check this out. Let's say you have severe mental illness. You go and you try 100 different medications. You find the ones that work the best, but they still have some kind of side effects, right? Then you have to take them as prescribed. These people don't have the discipline to shower and bathe. You know how many times I've tried to take vitamins every single day and I just don't have the discipline? So imagine someone with severe mental illness, no housing, no job, and they're told that they need to take these medications 3 times a day. And if they stop taking the medication or they don't have money to get it refilled, that they're going to go back into a schizophrenic episode, there needs to be like some type of injection that's like a year long or something.
Sure.
And then the side effects, most of these people, there isn't hey, take your meds and you're going to be fine story for them.
Yeah. And another thing to consider for that is why substances are so attractive for an individual with severe mental illness is very similar to somebody like myself that struggled with mental health and had a low brain vibrancy in terms of how I felt on a daily basis. When an individual uses substances, this is what we know for a scientific fact. It triggers dopamine in the brain, which is the reward system, which makes you feel a state of euphoria for a temporary moment. Your brain then says, this is good. An individual who has extreme or acute mental illness also has a low brain frequency and vibrancy to their day-to-day life. You put them on medications that can maybe stall or slow down the voices or curb the episodes of their borderline personality disorder that keep them from having a stable day-to-day life, but they don't have a reward. So it's hard to, one, get them disciplined to be able to even take these meds that can stop some of the reactions that their mental illness is causing. But then two, where's the reward? Their brain has been triggered by these substances that you, one, can stop some of the voices by taking this substance, or two, you can at least feel good about life when you're under the influence of these substances, which is why I truly believe that we have to get to a place as a country where institutions exist for those with high acuity mental health and that they aren't allowed to leave. But we have funding that take them to places
for sure,
that allow them to be involved in softball leagues and bowling leagues.
Yeah.
And
with the
basketball.
amount of money we spend trying to jail these people and help them in all these other obscure ways, it's like we have the money.
It's there.
For sure.
Bro, we've sent how many hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine?
Exactly. Yeah. We have the ability to fix the homeless population.
Yeah.
70%.
And create a place where those with high mental health acuity.
Well, they used to have them back in like the 70s.
That's what they say during the Reagan day. I think Reagan was the one they said that shut them down.
They had the MI facilities that were long-term. Any homeless person could go there. There was staff that would do, I'm sure they weren't like the best practices because it was like the 60s and 70s, but now we could definitely do it. They just stopped doing it. And then all those people, where'd they go?
Well, they're on the
streets. Exactly.
They're in Florida, New York, California, Seattle, Portland.
There you go. They all were.
Yes. Yeah.
So, hey, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I know we probably could have talked for hours, but hey, man, it's been a pleasure having you. Tony Hoffman, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on social media, Tony M. Hoffman on Instagram and TikTok, Tony Hoffman Speaking on Facebook. My website is tonyhoffmanspeaking.com. If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction and you're interested in treatment, absolutely check out my treatment center, PH Wellness, at phwellness.com. We have some very unique things that make us a different solution, and that solution may be what's right for you. And if it is, we'd love to help you or that loved one. Thank you for bringing me on here. I always love an opportunity to share my story and insight. So I can't say thank you enough. And thank you to everybody that took the time to listen to this episode.
Awesome. Appreciate you. Thank you, bro.